Hey everybody, so glad you could join me again for another one of our morning devotions. I really hope you've had a blessed Easter break, insofar as you were able to have a break over this past weekend. And certainly if you've been working or if you've been continuing in those sort of frontline services, I really trust that you've had a bit of a break or time with family over the weekend. And so it's post-Easter. We know that Jesus is risen. That was our Easter Sunday celebration. And yet, I want to plunge you into a passage today which is after the Easter narrative, after the resurrection, and yet it is still tainted by despair and sadness. How many of you know that, oftentimes we look back with hindsight and we look back retrospectively and we can see a story in a completely different light than those that actually had to play their part and those that had to be in it at that moment in time. And that's exactly what I want to bring to you today. In Luke chapter 24, there's a familiar story of two people on the road to a place called Emmaus. Now, this is post the resurrection. Jesus is risen, Sunday's happened, and yet it's a moment marked by confusion, a moment marked by a sense of unmet expectation. And I want us just to glean a few lessons from that today. So Luke 24, starting at verse 13, says this: Now behold, two of them were travelling that same day to a village called Emmaus, which was 7 miles from Jerusalem. And they talked together of all these things which had happened. And so it was, while they conversed and reasoned, that Jesus himself drew near and went with them. But their eyes were restrained. In other words, they didn't recognize him. They couldn't recognize him, so they did not know him. And he said to them, What kind of conversation is this, that you walk along together and are sad? And then the one whose name was Cleophas answered him and said, Are you the only stranger here in Jerusalem? And have you not known the things which have happened over these last days? And Jesus starts to play dumb with them, and he says, What things? And they said to him, The things concerning Jesus of Nazareth, who was a prophet, mighty in deed and word before God and all the people, and how the chief priests and our rulers delivered him to be condemned and crucified to death. But we were hoping, that's an interesting phrase, we were hoping that it was he who was going to redeem Israel. Indeed, besides all this, today is the 3rd day since these things happened. Yes, and certain women of our company who arrived at the tomb early astonished us. When they did not find his body, they came saying that they had seen a vision of angels who said he was alive. And those of us went to the tomb and found it just as the woman has said, but him we did not see. Him we did not see. Do you know that they're not actually sure where the village of Emmaus actually is? Get a concrete reference point for it. It was so insignificant, so lacking any importance back in the day, so mundane, that they're not actually sure where the actual site is. And friends, I want to say to you today that those are the exact kind of places that Jesus will show up in our lives. He'll show up in places where we don't expect him, show up in the places where we don't even necessarily recognize him. The insignificant places, the mundane places, the everyday places. And Emmaus tells me that just because we can't see him doesn't mean that God isn't there. Which is kind of a challenge to us in a sense as well, because I wonder how our speech would change, how our behaviour would change, how we treated people would change if we lived in an everyday acknowledgement that Jesus is there in unseen moments, that Jesus is present in ordinary stuff. You see, he's not just there. We don't pick him up on a Sunday and then leave him behind when we drive out the gate, because this passage tells me that if God was only about Sunday services, if God was only about Sunday experiences and gatherings, then he would have stayed in Jerusalem. He would have stayed in Jerusalem. But as it is, here we find Jesus on the road to nowhere, to a place called Emmaus, about to enter a couple's everyday life. And what he discovers, it's really interesting, what he discovers in this 7-mile journey with these people is that they believed in a God that ultimately they did not trust. And perhaps there are some of us here this morning listening to me, and your faith has been shaken. And all of us can experience those moments. Your faith has been shaken, and things have happened in the past that have caused us to doubt his goodness. And ultimately, perhaps there are some of us today that we believe in a God that will take us to heaven, but we don't really trust him to navigate us through earth. And it didn't happen like they thought it would happen. These couple that we find in the road, things didn't pan out the way they thought it was going to pan out. And here we find them in this Emmaus road. They've turned their back on God. They've turned their back on Jerusalem, the place they were told to go to, and they're walking away in the other direction. And I want you to remember that Jerusalem was a place where the Holy Spirit was promised. Jerusalem was the place where the promise of God was to come. And here we find this couple on an unknown road, walking away in the other direction, turning their backs on the resurrection power of God, turning their backs on the purpose of God for their lives. And you know, the battle for us guys at Easter is really the same battle that they had in this story. And I guess it's still the battle for us today, and it's this battle of, can God be trusted? You remember in the Garden of Eden, it's Satan's oldest strategy. He comes along to Eve and he says, did God really say? What's he trying to do? He's trying to convince Adam and Eve that God is not to be trusted. Did God really say? And that's the battle at Easter as well. All the promises Jesus had made, he was going to rise, he was going to do this, that, and the other thing, and yet here we have this couple coming along the road, and they're all of a sudden they're in this moment of disappointment and thinking it didn't pan out like we thought it was going to pan out. And you see, friends, if we have trust issues, if we have causes to doubt both the integrity of God and the integrity of people, it will steal the power of God from our lives, and it will also keep us from engaging in relationships. It will keep us from engaging in providential relationships that God has actually planned for our lives. So if we have trust issues, it's a really subtle thing, but it's majorly powerful. If you have trust issues, it will rob you of the blessings that God has for you and the blessing of relationship with other people. And what I see is at stake here in this road to Emmaus is Jesus on a rescue mission to retrieve what's been stolen from this couple. The promise of power they've turned their backs on, and a room full of people that they've turned their backs on as well. And you know what really gets me, and what I really want to major on today, is the fact that it's Easter season. Jesus has just risen from the dead. I want you to think about this. Now, Jerusalem is the religious capital of the world, and you think about all the claims he made and all the people that doubted him. If I was Jesus, the first place I would go would be into the middle of Jerusalem to show all the chief priests and all leaders, do you know what? I told you so. I told you it was the Messiah. I told you it would rise again. But so interesting. Jesus leaves the hype of the city. He goes to a place that nobody's heard of, so he can enter into the brokenness and the confusion of two weary travellers. And let me say this, at least they were honest, because you had a whole room full of people in Jerusalem that didn't believe in him either. They just decided they would stay and keep up appearances. So they stayed in Jerusalem, keeping up appearances. And I want you to catch this. Jesus will not show up to who we pretend to be in Jerusalem. Jesus won't show up to who we pretend to be in Jerusalem, but he will draw alongside us on our Emmaus road when we open up our hearts to him, when we open up our vulnerabilities to him, when we tell him how we really feel, and we show him what's really in our hearts. You know, David, the psalmist, said this. He says, a broken and contrite heart the Lord will not despise. In other words, he says, when you wear a mask, when you put a cover over your heart, and pride will make all of us do that, because we all have pride issues, let's be honest. That's a heart that God can't touch. When we mask it, when we don't reveal what's truly there. But when you expose your heart to God, friend, when you expose your heart to him, when you get rid of performance, when you get rid of the need to keep up appearances, that's when the Lord will draw alongside us and strengthen us, encounter us. And so when Jesus encounters this couple on the road, taking them away from the promise of God, because remember, the promised Holy Spirit is coming in Jerusalem, so they've turned their back on that, they're going in the wrong direction. He notices their faces marked by sadness, and he asks them, what's wrong? He already knows, but he asks them, what's wrong? And I suppose I would ask the same question to all of us today. What's wrong? If Jesus draws alongside us, we expose our hearts, and he says to us, what's wrong today? Maybe for you, your marriage is in trouble, but you feel I don't let anybody else know that. I can't let anybody know my business. I can't let them know I'm struggling. And so I'm keeping up appearances in Jerusalem, and I'm pretending to be religious when Jesus is in the dirt road of authenticity on the road to Emmaus. Maybe you haven't a penny to your name today, and we're going through difficult, challenging times. Haven't a penny to my name, but I better upgrade this car, otherwise people might think I'm in trouble. People might start to think I'm not doing well. Or maybe everybody, you know what, I have this reputation, I'm the life and soul of the party, I'm the one that lifts everybody else's spirits. And nobody else realises you maybe go home at night, cry yourself to sleep, and you struggle with depression as well as the next person. And so we keep up appearances in Jerusalem, not realising, my friends, that Jesus will meet us in our Emmaus road, and everybody's on the Emmaus road, whether they care to admit it or not. And sadly, friends, there's often, I always say this, there's often nowhere more fake, we could even say, than church, sadly, sometimes, because we want to be approved, we want to keep up appearances, and so we put up this facade in Jerusalem, when all the while acceptance is found in Emmaus road, and Jesus is walking on the Emmaus Road, where he goes undercover and is really willing and longing to meet with us. You see, the depth of our relationships, and it applies one to each other and it applies us to God, the depth of our relationships is proportionate to the depth to which we're willing to be known. It's the depth to which we're willing to expose ourselves and be known. See, God made relationship possible. He made healing possible when he revealed himself to us in the person of Jesus. When God exposed himself to us, our healing became possible. And so on the Emmaus Road, filled with disappointment, hurt and unmet expectations, God is hidden. But I want to just close with this, and it says this. Here's what turned it in Luke chapter 24 and verse 30. It says that when he was at the table with them, he went in to eat with them, and when he was at the table with them, he took bread and blessed it and broke it and gave it to them. Now watch this. Their eyes had been restrained all along, and now it says their eyes were opened and they recognized him. What was it about the breaking of bread that caused them to recognize him? They had walked for 7 miles with a stranger and hadn't a clue who he was, and now in this moment they're able to recognize him. Here's what it was, friends. I believe that as Jesus broke bread with them, for the first time in 7 miles, they saw his scars. And when Jesus exposed his wounds, their hope was restored, their trust was restored, and once more they could believe and trust. They could trust the God they had believed in. You see, when you expose your heart to God openly, honestly, tell him how it really is, and all your confusion, and all your hurt, and all your anxiety, God will expose himself to you. He says, he who draws near to me, I will draw near to them. And he meets people in the vulnerability and in the honesty of a mess in a way that he cannot meet the pretenders in Jerusalem. And catch this in verse 33. Last time, now I'm really done. Verse 33 says, and they arose that same hour and returned to Jerusalem. You see, it's okay, friends, to take a walk on the Emmaus Road. God encounters us on the Emmaus Road. We're all on the Emmaus Road. But it's not okay to stay on it, because the promise of the Holy Spirit is coming in Jerusalem. And so they had to get back. They had to get back to the place of promise. They had to get back to the place of relationship with other people. They had to get back to the place where the Spirit was going to come and their purpose would be outworked. They had to get joined to others. And so they had to get back there. Otherwise, and sadly this is so many people's experience, they had to get back. Otherwise they could go through life, walk through their whole life wondering what might it be. Just getting to heaven, but getting it there unfulfilled. And so we have to get back. You see, when you've truly been touched by Jesus, my friend, when he sets your heart ablaze, because it says that their hearts burned within them as he walked with them along the way and opened the scriptures to them. When you've truly been touched with Jesus, when he sets your heart ablaze, you will be able to return to the place of your disappointments. It says they arose that same hour and went back to the place they'd been hurt, the place they'd been disappointed, the place they'd been wounded. And when Jesus touches you, when he sets your heart ablaze, you will be able to return to the place of your disappointments. Go back to the places you were let down. Go back to the places you've been hurt. Go back to Jerusalem. And so his heart today is to bless us. His heart this morning is for us, but I want you to catch this. Here's the lesson from the Emmaus Road. Jesus can only bless authenticity. He can't bless who we pretend to be in Jerusalem. He can't bless a double life. And I want you to catch this wee line. We can't be fake and have our hearts on fire. We can't be fake and have our hearts on fire. So I pray today that God encounters you, and I know he will, as you expose yourself to him, as you're vulnerable, as you just open up your struggles to him. He promises he will meet you on that Emmaus Road, and he will set you up, bind up your wounds, heal your hurts, and set you back to Jerusalem where the promise is coming. So I hope you have a really blessed day. Take care, and God bless.